Happy Halloween, everybody! In this next video, I want to show you how you could take a waveform from a song and display it in 2D in the Unity screen. Okay, here we go!
Alright, in this video we're going to show you how to make a waveform display from a 2D project. We're going to have a 2D project here that we're going to do this with. So you create a new Unity 2D project. And over here I have my 2D project that I created. So when you first start, you have a sample scene and you're going to have a camera. I added to my project an arrow image. It's a PNG with a transparent background. Okay, and I also added 2 songs. And I have my track script, which is the thing that's going to draw the waveform. So this is the way the waveform looks. This is what this tutorial is going to show us how to do. It takes the song that's here and that we feed to the here in the audio source, and the script reads that song and displays the samples. Okay, so let's see what we got here. First, for the arrow, I just created a new 2D object sprite, and then I just assigned it the sprite of an arrow by dragging and dropping the arrow on there. Then I did it again. I said create GameObject 2D sprite, and I named it Waveform. And for the sprite renderer, I'm not going to drag a picture on there. I'm going to leave it alone because the script is going to define that. It's going to make the waveform. And I also I added a component for audio source, and then I drag and dropped one of the songs on here. The music one's shorter, so I'm going to use that one first, and then I just made sure that I was going to loop and play on awake. And then I drag and drop the script. So the script takes a couple of parameters, the width and the height of the waveform that's going to be drawn, and the background color and the foreground color for the waveform. Then I have a pointer to the arrow, so I could move the arrow with the script, and a pointer to the camera, so I could position the camera centered over the script. Let's look inside at the script. All right, so the script itself, it's really not that big to do this. It's simple. Well, I know in the script that I'm using an audio source and a sprite, so I just have these require components here so that if I drag and drop the script onto some other game object, it'll add the sprite and the audio source for me. And then here the script begins. These are the public variables that you saw in the inspector window. And then here are some internal variables that are just private to the script that I'm going to use when I'm doing my waveform rendering. First, I have a pointer to the audio source, then I'm going to have a pointer to the sprite renderer component right here. So I have pointers to these 2 components. And then I have a variable to see how big the sample size is that I have to, like my samples array. And then I have my waveform array, that's actually what's going to be drawn into the picture there, and an arrow offset X. This arrow offset X is because the arrow is a sprite, right? But you see the point is here, it's in the middle. So instead of positioning the sprite with 0, 0 being the position, if I want the arrow to actually point to the current waveform, I have to take into account this little offset of space, and that's what arrow offset X is. All right, so the start function runs when the script starts up. So I get some references to my game object components, like I said right here. Then I create a new texture 2D, and this function right here, getWaveform, is going to do all the work of drawing the waveform onto this texture 2D. I'll come back to this function in a minute. Let's finish going through start. After I get that texture with the waveform drawn on it, I create a sprite using that texture, and I assigned it to the sprite renderer sprite. So when I do this line right here, basically what it's doing is it's going to define the sprite right here for the waveform from the texture I made. All right, now down here, we just calculate, well, we get the sprite renderer for the arrow sprite, and we divide it by 2 to see how much we have to move over the arrow offset X that I talked about. Okay, and then over here, the camera, we first position the camera at 0, 0, 0, and this -1 makes sure that the camera is pulled back enough to see the layer there with the 2D objects on it. So the camera pulls back a little bit so you can see the 2D layer there. So that's why it has a -1. And then I just move the camera over to the right so that it's in the center of our waveform sprite. Okay, I just moved the camera over to the right because let me just show you play here. This is the camera's view, but as you can see, the camera started off here in the center of our 2D scene world, and it just moves over halfway across to the center of the waveform. Okay, so this gets our camera in position, our arrow offset, we figure out what it is, but mainly is this get waveform function here. So let's see what this does. This makes the waveform and puts it on a 2D texture so we could assign it to the sprite. So the get waveform function is right over here, and what it does is first it figures out half of the height because it's going to take the samples it reads and draw one line going up and one line going down. And then also the values for the samples that it gets from the audio file, they're really small. They're like from 0 to 1. So we just multiply those values by a scale, so we actually see some lines drawn. And the scale we multiply them by is the height of our waveform sprite. Okay, so now we kind of create the texture 2D that we're going to draw everything onto. And the size of that texture, we just make it the width and the height that was requested by the user. And then these are some other parameters like what kind of format are the pixels and if we're going to use maps or not. So the width of the texture is what was said, and also how many lines across the waveform texture is the width also. Okay, so now we're going to figure out from the audio clip, how many samples are there? How big does the array have to be to get the data? So that's going to be the clip samples times how many channels it has. So if it's a mono, this will be a 1. And if it's a stereo, this will be a 2. And who knows what else there'll be in the future about how many channels there are. But you got to remember, multiply by the channels so you could allocate a samples array of a proper size. And then the AudioClip.GetData gets that data, and I think that 0, yeah, it's an offset. So from the beginning of the samples, I get all the data, fill it in to the samples array. So this samples array is really, really big. You know, it's like it could be in the 300, it could be in the hundreds of thousands or whatever of samples. It depends how long the song is. But we can't represent every single line of the samples on our screen. So that's why the waveform array is smaller. It's only the size of the width of the sprite. So since we can't take every sample, we're going to see every other sample. How many every other sample are we going to do? It's the sample size divided by the width of how many we could actually record. And that's how many samples we're going to skip as we read the samples in here. So we go through the width of the waveform, and the waveform sample value is going to equal samples at W times the pack size. Okay, and that's how we kind of like take all these samples and kind of just get a smaller size that fits in our sprite. We use this over here. Now we have our texture and our array of waveform. Now let's just actually first clear the texture surface by setting every pixel in it to the background color. We go across on the X and Y. Texture is a 2D thing. And then we go across on the X and the Y again, and we draw a line, the height of whatever the value is at waveform, times our scale thing, so we could actually see a line. So then we just set the top line that goes from the center up, and we set the bottom line that goes from the center down. Okay? Then we apply the text to the texture, like the apply button that you'd see in the inspector sometimes, and we return the texture. So now we return the texture, and then that's what we use here to create the sprite. So that part right there would take care of actually drawing the sprite for us that we see in the game when it plays. It draws this sprite, the yellow. So the other thing that you saw was the arrow moving across. How do we do the arrow moving across? We have to do that in the update function. So as the song's playing along, the current position in time is changing. So we have the song's time, the audio's time, divided by the total time of the song gives us a percentage, like what percent is the song position at this moment. And then we just multiply that by the X size of our sprite. And we get a position. And that position, that X offset, is what we're going to set the arrow to. So we take the arrow and we set the position to the X offset. Take into account the little arrow offset, that little space between here. And on the Y, it's just 0. And that keeps the arrow moving. And that's really it. That's the simple script that does this. And we could do it with the Music 1 song, which is only, I think, 4 seconds long. Okay. And then we could do it with a sound or a song that's even bigger than 4 seconds. This song is 4 minutes long. But, you know, we take all the samples and we only get a piece of them that we could show in our thing. And we get kind of like a picture of what the song looks like in a waveform. So this one's moving much slower because the whole song is 4 minutes. So anyway, that's how you do it. Enjoy. Happy Halloween.